This is the AJAZZ AKC087, a TKL mechanical keyboard with a pretty bold case design in the form of steel plates stacked in separate layers. Looks like it could be a disaster in terms of the typing sound, but let's find out, shall we? Thanks to WhatGeek for sending this one over for a review, and in fact they sent the AKC087 as a bare bone and supplied some Outemu Pandas tactile switches, and I don't know how to say it, but I think it's PIIFOX Cyberpunk keycaps for this build out. See my discount codes and affiliate links in the description for discount on everything used in this build. So let's get it out of the box. This is the kit version, and in the box you get the keyboard with a dust cover and a 2.4 GHz receiver in the storage location, and you get a cable, a screwdriver for disassembly, a switch and keycap puller, a manual, and this AJAZZ keychain. Whenever I get a bare bone keyboard, I like to do a stock build to see if any mods need doing. Before we do that, let's have a quick look at a stabilizer. There is factory lube, but it's a rough syringe job, with most of the lube ending up on the PCB. I went for the Outemu Pandas tactile switches specifically because they were pre-lubed, but it looks to me like the lube job is limited to the bottom of the springs only, which should eliminate some spring ping. The absence of lube elsewhere may actually be a good thing if the switches are any good, as incorrectly lubing tactiles will usually do more harm than good for my taste. So in with the Outemu Pandas, these are obviously a box Panda spec tactile with a 3.3mm stroke, a 50g operating force and a 65g end force. They have a nice big LED slot in the bottom housing and a clear top housing, so should let plenty of light through. Tactiles are a good switch for testing the sound profile of this case, as they will bottom out hard and amplify the nasty or nice sound profile. Now it's on with the keycaps. The PIIFOX Cyberpunk ASA Profile PBT keycaps are a funky set. They're similar to the Pixel Universe keycap set from Keytok and Keychron, but obviously with the Cyberpunk theme. The translucent purple sides will let a nice bit of RGB through, which will end up being a standout feature of this build. The AJAZZ AKC087 kit is $90 on WhatGeek and is $100 as a fully assembled keyboard. The Outemu Pandas are $17 for a pack of 35, making them 48 cents a switch, and $42 for this 87 key build. The PIIFOX Cyberpunk keycaps are $65 for a set, bringing the total on this build to $197. Now let's hear how it sounds in the stock configuration. It took a lot of typing for me to really take in the stock typing sound and consider what could be improved upon. If you don't consider the case structure, it sounds like you're hearing hollowness and case resonance, but of course what you're really hearing is the sound coming out of the gaps in the case, and probably some reverberance on those steel sheets, completely uncontained and undampened. This is a sound profile you need to like and embrace to a degree, because even though it can be changed slightly with mods, you won't make this keyboard sound like a solid metal case, no matter what you do. Additional to that, the stabs did sound a bit rough and the spacebar actually felt quite sluggish, so they will need some work. General first impressions on the keyboard are okay. We've got a really nice and functional TKL layout. When looking down on the keyboard, all appears pretty standard, but when you look at the side profile you can see straight through the keyboard, and you can see the bottom of the switches between the plate and the PCB. Even with the gaps between the steel plates, the keyboard weighs similar to what a chunky CNC aluminium TKL would, because the plates are made of steel. The electrical hardware is housed in the black steel tray under the bottom steel plate, and you can see the mode switch, Windows and Mac switch, the USB-C port and the 2.4 GHz wireless receiver, all relatively close to one another there. The tray gives a positive typing angle and there are no angle adjusting feet, but the typing angle is good as it is. The keyboard is tri-mode and the Bluetooth works well. It was a bit finicky at first, as you have to single press and release function plus Q, W or E to select which Bluetooth connection you want to use, then press and hold the same key combination for 3 seconds to place it in pairing mode. You can usually both select the Bluetooth connection you want to use and place it in pairing mode both with one single long press of the key combination. The PCB is south facing and obviously hot swap. The RGB is really popping with the PIIFOX Cyberpunk keycaps. I really like this set actually, and the Outemu Pandas seem pretty decent for a stock set of tactiles. Next I disassembled the keyboard to both check out the build and see what mods we can do. Obviously the keycaps come off, the switches come out, and the plate mount stabilizers come out. From here I can see that the top section of the case is secured by hella tray mount screws. I counted 14. Once those screws are out, you tilt up the top two steel sheets with the PCB screwed fast to the bottom of the two. From here we can unplug the battery and daughter board from the PCB and lift the top section off. What we've effectively got with the top section is the top steel sheet giving some depth to the keyboard and bordering the keycaps, with the second sheet being the plate. With the two sheets being fastened together with screws, it effectively becomes a top case integrated plate. Next we need to remove the 6 screws holding the PCB to the plate, and at this point it obviously looks like a top mounted keyboard. However, the 14 screws down through the plate secure the plate to the standoffs in the bottom case, so it is a tray mounted keyboard. And this is as far as we need to disassemble this one. You could take every steel sheet apart and the tray off the bottom, but there really is no need for the mods that I'll be doing. Looking at the PCB, we can see where most of the factory stabilizer lube ended up. Everything looks pretty good quality. It's a 1.6mm PCB and it has no screw-in stabilizer compatibility. The plate and top section is nicely made and I like the grey glittery paint job. We've got standoffs on the underside where the PCB screws into place, and obviously we've got no plate dampening or switch pad. Looking at the bottom case, or the bottom two sheets in the tray, we have the 14 standoffs where the top section is fastened down through the plate, and there are a couple of cutouts for the daughter board and battery wires. I quite like the tray on the bottom housing the electrical hardware, as it carries on the theme in terms of being a novel case design. Now we'll move on to the build and mods. I'm not going to dampen the bottom case or between the plate and PCB, even though you could, as this is fighting the case design a bit too much. I like being able to see through it. Before I started with the mods, I cleaned the PCB thoroughly with rubbing alcohol to get rid of the mess of lube from underneath the stabilizers. So first I installed the switch pads, which is a time-consuming job, but I fancied it over the PE foam mod on this one. These are EVA switch pads from K-Republic and they're 0.5mm thick. This will change the sound profile and hopefully reduce the resonance. Next up I tape modded. I did a 3-layer tape mod for maximum effect. This creates a thick sheet and adding more layers will have little effect. This will make the keyboard sound a little more dense and hopefully reduce that case resonance as well. Then I installed O-rings on the tray mount screws under the plate. They'll sit between the plate and standoffs in the bottom case. This is to isolate the plate from the case to reduce resonance as well. Then before putting the case back together, I placed some fiber washers on the plate standoffs to sit between the PCB and plate. This is also to isolate and reduce resonance. With that done, I carefully landed the PCB on the plate and secured it with the 6 screws. I couldn't quite believe it, but all the washers stayed in place and were between the standoffs and the PCB. Next I plugged the battery and daughter board back into the PCB, landed the top section on the bottom section and fastened it all back together with the 14 tray mount screws. I installed all the switches apart from the stabilizer switches, then got to work on the stabilizers. I lubed the outside of the stems and inside of the housings with Krytox 205 grade 0 and lubed the wires with dielectric grease. I very infrequently holy mod anymore, as stabilizers just seem to be getting better and better and don't need it. With that done, it's in with the stabilizers and on with the keycaps, and we're ready for a modded typing test. So as you will have heard there, those mods did a nice job in just tidying up the typing sound a little and removed some of the resonance coming from those plates, which was a little much on the stock build. The typing sound is very different to a solid case. It's not my favourite sound profile if I'm honest, but I don't think it's just out and out bad sounding. I just think it's a preference type of thing. It's fairly loud though, this keyboard, so unless you're going to run silent switches, it probably wouldn't be warmly received by your co-workers in an office environment. Just to touch on a few more thoughts before we finish up, the RGB is really good, especially with the switch and keycap combination I've gone for with this build. It has 18 effects, brightness adjustment, speed adjustment, and all the usual customization you expect with an RGB keyboard. Generally speaking, I don't mind this keyboard. It's something a bit different in terms of the aesthetic and looks and feels pretty nice quality. I'm just not mad on the typing sound. It's a bit noisy and unrefined for me, and it is a bit too typewriter sounding in my opinion. It got better with mods and is a must mod keyboard in my opinion. I for sure wouldn't use it stock. And it's definitely an acquired taste, this sound profile, so watch plenty of typing tests before you commit. I'd love to see this exact design but with layers of frosted acrylic sandwiched between the steel plates to make a solid case. That would sound really interesting and the RGB would light up the frosted acrylic. Maybe one for the future AJAZZ. And that's it. I hope you found this video useful and I'll catch you in the next one.